The screen flickered to life and Adam Schiff's face appeared. Not the face sitting in the Senate hearing room today, but his face from 2017. 8 years younger, hair darker, eyes bright with the particular confidence of a man who believes the cameras will always love him. He was leaning forward on MSNBC, across from Chuck Todd, and the audio filled the Hart Senate office building with crystal clarity. I can tell you that the case is more than circumstantial. I can't go into particulars, but there is more than circumstantial evidence now. Cut, same face, different network, CNN this time. December 2017, Jake Tapper nodding along. The Russians offered help. The campaign accepted help. The Russians gave help. And the president made full use of that help. That is pretty damning. Cut, ABC. October 2017. George Stephanopoulos asking the question Schiff wanted to answer. A lot of that has been corroborated. He was talking about the Steele dossier, the collection of salacious allegations that special counsel John Durham would later expose as fabricated opposition research sourced from a Russian immigrant who told the FBI his information was bar talk and speculation. Schiff was telling America it had been verified. Cut, MSNBC again. Rachel Maddow, November 2017. We are getting very close to the bottom of this, and it's a very serious matter of potential criminality. Cut, CNN, 2019. Anderson Cooper providing the perfect setup. The evidence is now clear. It's in plain sight. Cut, ABC, 2020, still claiming certainty. We now have ample evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. The screen went dark. The hearing room fell absolutely silent. Every senator on the Select Committee on Intelligence sat motionless. The press gallery, which had been buzzing since the hearing began 90 minutes ago, was still. Somewhere in the back row, a camera shutter clicked once and stopped. Even that small sound seemed too loud. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard sat at the witness table. She wore a dark navy suit, crisp white shirt, no jewelry. Her posture was military straight. The posture of a woman who had spent 20 years in the Army National Guard, deployed to Iraq, Kuwait, the Horn of Africa. The posture of someone who had seen combat and knew that silence, deployed correctly, is more powerful than any accusation. She let the silence hold, 3 full seconds. Then she spoke, her voice measured and deliberate. Now let me read what the witnesses who testified before your committee said under oath. Senator Schiff. She opened a manila folder. Not a thick binder, just a single folder, thin because the truth was always shorter than the lies. Former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, March 2017. Quote, I never saw any direct empirical evidence that the Trump campaign or someone in it was plotting or conspiring with the Russians to meddle with the election. End quote. She turned a page. Former Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates asked directly if she had evidence of collusion. Answer, no. Another page. Former National Security Advisor Susan Rice. Same question. Answer, no. She closed the folder with deliberate care. Senator Schiff, you sat in the room when these witnesses said this. You had their transcripts. You classified them. You kept them secret for over a year and released them only when the White House threatened to do it first. And then, knowing what these witnesses had said under oath, you went on television hundreds of times and told the American people the opposite. She looked directly at him, not with anger, with something colder, the look of a prosecutor reading charges. You didn't misspeak. You didn't exaggerate. You lied, deliberately, repeatedly, for 7 years. And you did it while holding a security clearance that gave you access to the most sensitive intelligence in this country. Access you used not to inform the public but to deceive them. Senator Adam Schiff sat 6 seats to her left on the raised dais. His hands were flat on the desk before him, fingers spread slightly, the posture of control. His face was composed in the careful mask of a man who has spent decades in politics and knows that cameras catch everything, especially weakness. But behind the mask, something was fracturing, not because the accusations were new. He'd heard versions of them for years from Fox News, from Republican colleagues, from Trump himself. But because this time the accusations came packaged with his own voice, his own face, his own words on a screen, played back in sequence against the sworn testimony of his own witnesses. You can dismiss an accusation. You can spin a headline. You can call something a partisan attack or Russian disinformation or a witch hunt. But you cannot unsay what you said on camera. You cannot unrecord what was recorded. You cannot make 53 million people unsee what they just watched. To understand how they got here, how the man who spent 7 years as the face of the Russia investigation found himself watching his own credibility disassemble in real time on live television, you have to go back 4 hours. To the morning when Adam Schiff still believed he was the prosecutor and Tulsi Gabbard was the defendant. He arrived at the Russell Senate office building at 7:15, early but not unusually so. His chief of staff, Patrick Boland, was already there with a briefing packet, 2 lattes, and a legal pad covered in talking points written in blue pen with multiple underlines. The declassification is the vulnerability, Boland said without preamble. She released the HPSCI report over CIA objections. Former analysts are on record saying they were shocked at the level of detail. Warner has already called it reckless on Morning Joe. That's your line of attack. Schiff nodded. He sat at his desk, the one with the perfect view of the Capitol dome, and opened the packet. Inside were 3 sections, each one color-coded. Blue for opening statement, yellow for primary questions, pink for rebuttals and pivots. Each section designed to accomplish the same objective: frame Tulsi Gabbard as a political operative using the intelligence apparatus to exact revenge on behalf of Donald Trump. The strategy had worked before. It had worked against Devin Nunes when Nunes released his memo in 2018. It had worked against John Durham when Durham's report came out in 2023. The playbook was simple and well-tested. Accuse the accuser of politicization. Invoke the sacred phrase sources and methods. Express grave concern about damage to intelligence partnerships. Let the friendly media do the rest. CNN would run the Gabbard endangers national security chyron. MSNBC would book 4 former intelligence officials to express alarm, preferably people who had worked in the Obama administration and could speak with authority about norms. The New York Times editorial board would write something about the erosion of institutional guardrails. By evening, the hearing would be remembered not for what Gabbard said, but for what Schiff said about what she did. She's a former Democrat who switched sides for power, Schiff said, taking the first latte. The media already doesn't trust her. This should be straightforward. His communications director, a sharp young woman named Alina, looked up from her phone where she was monitoring the early coverage. Her approval among independents is higher than you'd think, she said. 43% in the last Reuters poll. The military background plays well with older voters. Schiff waved this away. Military background doesn't matter in a hearing about intelligence declassification. She doesn't have the technical credentials. She's never been an analyst. She's never run an intelligence operation. She got the job because she stood on a debate stage and endorsed Trump. That's the story. He had spent the previous evening rehearsing his questions in his Senate office, the way he always did before major hearings. He had a method. Write the question on a note card, practice delivering it 3 times, time the dramatic pause. He knew exactly when to slow down for emphasis, exactly when to look at the camera instead of the witness, exactly when to repeat a phrase for the clip that would run on the evening news. He had rehearsed 5 questions, each one building toward the same conclusion. Gabbard is a political operative, not an intelligence professional. She's declassifying to help Trump, not to inform the public. She's a weapon, not a watchdog. The censure didn't stick, Boland reminded him. It actually helped your fundraising. Durham didn't stick. Mueller's findings didn't stick in the way Republicans wanted. She's going to bring up the same talking points they've been using for years, and you'll bat them away the same way you always do. Schiff smiled. He had survived worse. He had survived the Mueller investigation finding no conspiracy. He had survived the Durham report. He had survived the censure resolution, had actually fundraised off it, turning the censure into a badge of honor, proof that he was so effective against Trump that Republicans had to officially punish him. He'd turned every attack into a weapon, every accusation into a fundraising email, every setback into a narrative of political persecution. What Schiff didn't know, because he had spent so long being the person who controlled the narrative that he'd forgotten other people could control it too, was that Tulsi Gabbard had spent 3 weeks preparing for this, hearing the way a combat soldier prepares for a mission. Methodically, quietly, with the understanding that when the moment comes, you don't have time to improvise. 3 miles away, in a secure conference room at ODNI headquarters in McLean, Virginia, Gabbard sat with her general counsel, Marcus Webb, and a small team of analysts who had spent the past month building what they called, with the dark humor common to intelligence professionals, the Schiff file. The file was organized chronologically. It began in January 2017 and ended in August 2025. It contained 3 categories of material, each devastating on its own, catastrophic in combination. Category 1. Every public statement Adam Schiff had made about Russia collusion on television, radio, or in print. There were over 200. The team had compiled them into a searchable database with timestamps, networks, and exact quotes. They had also edited a compilation video, 12 minutes long, professionally cut, that showed Schiff making the same claims across dozens of appearances, year after year. More than circumstantial evidence. Collusion is a fact. The evidence is in plain sight. Ample evidence. The same words, the same confident delivery, the same careful eye contact with the camera. Category 2. The sworn testimony of Obama administration officials before Schiff's own committee. Testimony Schiff had kept classified until forced to release it. Clapper, Yates, Rice, Lynch, Kamei, Power, Rhodes. Not one of them had confirmed the existence of evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. Not one. Category 3. The declassified documents from July 2025. The HPSCI report. The whistleblower accounts. The internal emails showing how the intelligence assessment on Russian interference had been constructed, revised, and promoted despite internal dissent about its conclusions. He'll go after the declassification, Webb said. Sources and methods. CIA objections. That's his comfort zone. Let him, Gabbard said. Every time he talks about the sanctity of classified information, I get to ask him about reading the Steele dossier into the congressional record, a document funded by the Clinton campaign, sourced from a fired FBI informant, that the FBI's own subsource said was based on rumor and bar talk. He entered it into the permanent record of the United States Congress as verified intelligence. She closed the file. He thinks this hearing is about me, about what I declassified, about whether I'm qualified. He's going to spend his time trying to put me on trial, and every time he opens a door, I'm going to walk through it with his own words. Webb nodded slowly. What if he doesn't take the bait? He will, Gabbard said with certainty. He can't help himself. He spent 8 years being the smartest person in every room, the person nobody challenges, the media's favorite expert. He's never been in a hearing where the witness fights back, and he's never been in a hearing where the witness has his transcripts. She paused, picked up a printout. A screenshot of Schiff on CNN from February 2018, captioned, Schiff, evidence of collusion is clear. You know what's remarkable about this, she said. He didn't even need to be careful. He could say anything at all, and nobody in the media would push back. Not Chuck Todd, not Rachel Maddow, not Anderson Cooper. He had the magic shield. I'm the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. I have access to classified information you don't have. Trust me. And they did, for years. The only person who ever pushed back on a major network was Morgan Ortagus on The View in 2021. Guest host, not even a regular. She asked him point blank about the Steele dossier, and he called her premise a smokescreen. That's how insulated he's been. One adversarial question in 7 years. We're going to give him a lot more than one. Webb looked at the flash drive containing the compilation video. Are we sure about playing this in the hearing? It's unprecedented. So was reading fabricated intelligence into the congressional record, Gabbard said. So was inventing presidential quotes and calling it parody. So was lying about talking to a whistleblower. He set the precedent for the unprecedented. I'm just following his lead. And he's never been in a hearing with someone who used to sit on his side of the aisle. and knows exactly how the machine works. The hearing began at 10 o'clock. The hearing room was at capacity 30 minutes before the gavel. Schiff arrived through the main entrance, pausing briefly for the camera cluster in the hallway. Today, we hold the intelligence community accountable for politically motivated declassifications that endanger American sources and methods, he told a reporter from CNN. He wore a charcoal suit and a blue tie, his standard hearing attire, chosen because it reads well on camera and projects the sober authority of a man who takes classified information seriously. The irony of that particular projection would become apparent within the hour. Gabbard entered through a side door. No entourage, no dramatic statement to the press, just a woman with a folder and a flash drive walking to the witness table. She wore that dark navy suit, no jewelry, no accessories. The aesthetic was deliberate, military briefer, not politician. She adjusted her microphone, poured a glass of water, and waited. She didn't look at Schiff. She didn't need to. She knew exactly where he was sitting and exactly what he was planning to say. She'd read every hearing transcript he'd ever participated in. She knew his rhythms, his tells, the way he builds to a dramatic question and then pauses for the camera. The way he restates a premise 3 times because he knows the third repetition is the one that gets clipped. She'd studied him the way a soldier studies an enemy position, not to fear it, but to know exactly where the weaknesses were. Chairwoman Susan Collins gavelled the room to order and read the opening statement. The Select Committee on Intelligence will come to order. Today, we will hear testimony from Director of National Intelligence Tulsi, Gabbard, regarding recent declassifications of intelligence community documents related to the 2016 election and the origins of the Russia investigation. The first hour was procedural. Republican senators asked about the declassification process, the whistleblower protections Gabbard had implemented, the progress of the dig, the declassification and intelligence group she'd established at ODNI. Gabbard answered in the clipped, precise language of an intelligence briefer. Facts, dates, numbers. No editorializing. Democratic senators followed a coordinated line of attack. Senator Warner of Virginia asked about CIA objections to the declassification. Senator Heinrich of New Mexico raised concerns about foreign partner relationships. Senator King of Maine asked whether the documents had been reviewed by all 17 intelligence agencies before release. Gabbard answered each question directly, acknowledging the concerns while noting that the president had constitutional declassification authority. Then it was Schiff's turn. He adjusted his microphone with practiced ease, straightened his notes, looked down at the witness table the way he had looked at hundreds of witnesses before. The way a prosecutor looks at a defendant who doesn't yet know the trap has been set. Director Gabbard, he began, his voice carrying the particular authority of someone who has spent decades making opening statements. In July, you declassified a House Intelligence Committee staff report from 2020 that had been kept classified by both the first Trump administration and the Biden administration. You did so over the objections of CIA officials who warned, and I'm quoting from NBC News, that the level of detail exposed could alert Moscow to how intelligence was collected and potentially endanger sources. Former CIA analyst Michael Vickers said he was, quote, shocked at what was revealed. My question is simple. Did you prioritize political impact over the safety of intelligence sources? Gabbard leaned toward her microphone. Her voice was calm, measured, the voice of someone who had been waiting for exactly this question. Senator, thank you for the question. The decision to declassify was made in coordination with the president, who has constitutional authority over classification. I take the protection of sources and methods extremely seriously. As someone who served in a combat zone in Iraq, in Kuwait, on the Horn of Africa, my life depended on the quality and security of intelligence. I understand the stakes in a way that goes beyond the theoretical. With respect, Director, you didn't answer my question. I'm getting there, Senator. I wanted to establish my perspective on classified information because you've raised the subject of its sanctity, and I'd like to address that directly. She opened her folder. On March 20th, 2017, you sat in this building. Not this room, but the House equivalent. And during an Intelligence Committee hearing, you read allegations from the Steele dossier into the congressional record. The Steele dossier was a collection of opposition research funded by the Hillary Clinton campaign through the law firm Perkins Coie and the research firm Fusion GPS. Its primary source, Igor Danchenko, was later charged by special counsel Durham with making false statements to the FBI. Danchenko himself told the FBI in January 2017, 2 months before your hearing, that his information was, and I quote, hearsay and just talk. She looked up. The FBI had already discredited the dossier's key claims and fired Christopher Steele as an informant by the time you read it into the congressional record. Inspector General Horowitz later found 17 significant errors and omissions in the FISA applications that relied on it. And yet you presented those allegations, unverified, debunked, sourced from Kremlin-linked gossip, as fact on the floor of Congress, into the permanent record. She paused. So when you ask me about the sanctity of classified information, Senator, I take the question seriously. But I'd respectfully note that the person asking it is the same person who entered fabricated intelligence into the congressional record and defended it on 200 television appearances. The hearing room shifted, not dramatically. Hearings don't shift the way courtrooms do in movies, but there was a perceptible change in the quality of attention. The way people stop looking at their phones and start looking at the people in front of them. Schiff's jaw tightened. He had expected the Steele dossier to come up. He had an answer prepared. He'd used it before on The View on CNN in dozens of interviews. He couldn't have known people were lying to Steele. The dossier needed to be investigated. He was doing his job. Director Gabbard, the Steele dossier was a matter of legitimate concern that warranted investigation. I stand by the committee's decision to examine its allegations. Senator, I'm not asking about the committee's decision. I'm asking about yours. Your personal decision to read unverified claims into the permanent record. Your personal decision to go on television afterward and tell Chuck Todd you had seen more than circumstantial evidence of collusion. Your personal decision to tell CNN that collusion was a fact. Your personal decision to tell Rachel Maddow you were very close to a prosecutable case. She paused. I'd like to tell you what the witnesses who testified to your own committee said under oath in closed session. Testimony you classified and kept secret until 2020. Former DNI James Clapper. I never saw any direct empirical evidence that the Trump campaign or someone in it was plotting or conspiring with the Russians. Former Deputy AG Sally Yates asked if she'd seen evidence of collusion. Answer, no. Former National Security Advisor Susan Rice. Answer, no. Former Attorney General Loretta Lynch. Former UN Ambassador Samantha Power. Former Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes. None of them, not one, confirmed the existence of evidence that you claim to have on television. You had their transcripts, Senator. You sat in the room when they said this. And then you went on camera and told the American people the opposite. She let the facts sit in the air like smoke. And I can speak to this from a particular vantage point, Senator, because when you were making those claims, I was a member of the Democratic Party. I was serving in the House of Representatives. I was watching you do it. And what I saw, a colleague using classified access to deceive the public for political advantage, is one of the reasons I left the party. This was the moment Schiff hadn't prepared for, not the accusations. He'd heard those before, but the source. Gabbard wasn't a Republican operative. She wasn't a Fox News commentator. She was a former Democrat, a former colleague, a combat veteran who had served in Baghdad while he was building his television career. The partisan attack defense, which had shielded him for years, collapsed the moment she said the words. When you were making those claims, I was a member of the Democratic Party. Schiff regrouped. He was a former prosecutor. He knew how to absorb a blow and redirect. He leaned into his microphone and spoke with the controlled intensity of a man who has been doing this for a very long time. Director Gabbard, I appreciate the theatrical presentation, but let's be clear about what's happening here. You left the Democratic Party. You campaigned for Donald Trump. He rewarded you with this position. And now you're using the intelligence apparatus, the same apparatus you accuse me of politicizing, to conduct a political prosecution of a sitting United States senator. This isn't oversight. This is retribution. Gabbard nodded slowly. Senator, you're right that I left the Democratic Party. Let me tell you why. Her voice shifted, not louder, deeper, the voice of someone accessing something real. In 2004, I was a state representative in Hawaii. 23 years old, I had just been re-elected. My unit, the 29th Infantry Brigade Combat Team of the Hawaii Army National Guard, was called up for deployment to Iraq. I wasn't on the mandatory roster. My commander told me I could stay home, keep my seat, keep my career. I volunteered instead. I became the first sitting state official in American history to voluntarily leave public office to serve in a war zone. I served in a medical unit at Logistical Support Area Anaconda in Baghdad. I treated wounded soldiers. I read casualty lists every morning looking for names I recognized. The sign at the entrance to our base said, "Is today the day?" That was our greeting, every day for 12 months. When I came home, I served in Congress as a Democrat for 8 years. I ran for president as a Democrat. I served on the Armed Services Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee. And what I saw, Senator, from the inside was a party that would say anything, use any institution, weaponize any piece of intelligence to maintain power. The Russia collusion narrative wasn't intelligence analysis. It was a political operation, and you were its chief architect. So no, Senator, I didn't leave because Trump recruited me. I left because of what I saw people like you doing with classified information. I left because I watched you go on television and claim you had evidence that didn't exist while the actual evidence, the testimony of your own witnesses, sat in a classified vault that you refused to open. I served in Baghdad while you served on CNN, and I take the integrity of intelligence more seriously than you ever have. The room was quiet. Schiff's communications team, watching from a staff office on the 3rd floor, exchanged the look that political operatives exchange when they realize the playbook isn't working. Alina texted Boland, "He needs to pivot now." But Schiff didn't pivot. Schiff did what Schiff always does when a line of attack isn't working. He escalated. It was the instinct that had made him famous, and the instinct that would now unmake him. Director Gabbard, since you've raised the subject of credibility, let me remind you. Senator, since you've raised it, let me add to the record. She didn't wait for permission. The cadence of the exchange had shifted. She was no longer answering questions. She was conducting a deposition. September 26, 2019. You chaired a hearing on the Ukraine whistleblower complaint. In your opening statement, broadcast live to millions of Americans, you read what you presented as the president's words to President Zelensky. You said, and I quote, "I want you to make up dirt on my political opponent, understand? Lots of it. I'm going to say this only 7 times, so you better listen good." The president never said those words. Not in the transcript, not in any version of the call, not in any witness account. You fabricated them. When Representative Mike Turner confronted you, you said your reading was meant to be, at least in part, parody. Parody. The chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, the person entrusted with oversight of the most sensitive intelligence operations in the United States, fabricated presidential quotes during an impeachment hearing that was broadcast to the entire nation. And he called it parody. She turned a page. 8 days before that hearing, September 17, 2019, you appeared on MSNBC. A reporter asked you directly whether you or your committee had communicated with the whistleblower. You said, and I quote, "We have not spoken directly with the whistleblower. We would like to." PolitiFact rated that statement false. Your committee staff had in fact communicated with the whistleblower before the complaint was filed. The whistleblower had approached your aide. Your aide had briefed you on the outlines of the complaint. You knew. And you said the opposite on national television. Then, when the coordination between your staff and the whistleblower was publicly revealed, you reversed course. You had been demanding that the whistleblower testify publicly. Once the coordination was exposed, you blocked the testimony. You wanted transparency until transparency would expose you. Schiff opened his mouth, closed it. He looked to Chairwoman Collins, hoping she might intervene on time, but his 5 minutes weren't up. He still had time. The problem was that he had nothing to fill it with. Every prepared response. I stand by the committee's work. This is a partisan distraction. The evidence speaks for itself. Sounded hollow against the specific, dated, documented record that Gabbard was reading into this hearing the way he had once read the Steele dossier into his. Gabbard continued, and since we're discussing patterns of credibility, Senator, I'll note one more item for the record. In May 2025, the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency submitted a criminal referral to the Department of Justice, alleging that you falsified bank documents and property records on 5 Fannie Mae loans between 2003 and 2019. The allegation is that you claimed your Maryland home as your primary residence on mortgage applications, while simultaneously claiming your California condominium as your primary residence for a homeowner's tax exemption. Both at once. For 16 years. Fannie Mae's Financial Crimes Unit concluded you engaged in what they called a sustained pattern of possible occupancy misrepresentation. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Maryland has reportedly opened an investigation. I don't know if you're guilty, Senator. That's for the Justice Department to determine. But I find it relevant to this hearing that a man who spent 7 years accusing a president of being compromised by a foreign power, based on evidence that his own witnesses said didn't exist, is now accused, with documentary evidence, of lying to banks to get better mortgage rates. Schiff's face had gone through several phases during the exchange. Controlled composure, studied indifference, a flash of anger when the mortgage referral came up, and now something else. Something that looked, to the trained eye of the C-SPAN cameras, like the particular stillness of a man who realizes he is watching his own narrative collapse and has no way to stop it. This is exactly what the Trump administration wants, he said, and his voice had lost its prosecutorial edge, replaced by something tighter, more defensive, using the intelligence apparatus to persecute political opponents. This is authoritarianism. Senator Gabbard said, I'd like to play something for the committee, if the chairwoman permits. Collins nodded. Gabbard's aide pressed a button. The screens on either side of the hearing room lit up. And now we're back where we started, the compilation. Schiff's own face, his own voice, clip after clip after clip, more than circumstantial evidence. Collusion is a fact. The evidence is in plain sight, ample evidence, very close to a prosecutable case, corroborated, year after year, network after network, the same claims, the same confidence, the same careful eye contact with the camera that had made him one of the most recognizable Democrats in America. Then the audio shifted. Flat, formal, the cadence of sworn testimony. Clapper, I never saw any direct empirical evidence. Yates, no. Rice, no. The screen went dark. Gabbard spoke into the silence. Senator Schiff has spent the last 7 years telling the American people that he had evidence of a conspiracy between a president and a foreign power. He didn't. He told them the Steele dossier had been corroborated. It hadn't. He fabricated presidential quotes in an impeachment hearing and called it parody. He lied about communicating with a whistleblower and then blocked that whistleblower from testifying when the lie was exposed. He read unverified gossip, funded by a political campaign, into the congressional record as fact. He kept witness transcripts classified for over a year because they contradicted his public claims, and only released them when forced. He was censured by the House of Representatives on June 21, 2023, by a vote of 213 to 209. He had to stand in the well of the House while the resolution was read aloud. That resolution stated, and I quote, that he abused this trust by alleging he had evidence of collusion that never existed, and he is now under federal investigation for mortgage fraud. I served in Iraq. I know what real threats to this country look like. Mortars, IEDs, casualty lists. The sign that said, "Is today the day?" And I can tell you that the greatest threat to American democracy is not a foreign adversary. It is an elected official who uses the most sensitive information in this country to deceive the people who trusted him with it. The documents I've declassified tell the truth. Senator Schiff has spent 7 years trying to prevent the American people from seeing that truth. Today they saw it. She closed her folder. Chairwoman Collins waited 2 seconds. The senator's time has expired. Director Gabbard, thank you for your testimony. Madame Chairwoman, I categorically reject. Schiff began. The senator's time has expired, Collins repeated. The committee will stand in recess for 15 minutes. The gavel fell. Schiff sat in his chair. Senators stood and began filing out. Staff moved through the aisles. The press gallery erupted into the controlled chaos of reporters filing urgent dispatches on phones and laptops. Schiff did not stand. He sat perfectly still, looking at the blank screen where his own face had been playing moments ago. His chief of staff approached from behind, leaned down, whispered something. Schiff shook his head. Not yet. He was thinking about the compilation. Not about its content, he'd heard every criticism before, but about its form. The side-by-side, his own face, his own voice, unedited, unmanipulated, playing next to the sworn testimony of people he'd supervised. There was no way to call it doctored, no way to call it taken out of context, no way to call it Russian disinformation or a Republican hit job. It was his words, on camera, on networks he chose, in interviews he requested, said with the confidence of a man who believed nobody would ever compile them and hold them up against the actual record. He thought about the Steele dossier. He'd read it into the Congressional Record on March 20, 2017. He remembered the moment. He remembered believing it, or telling himself he believed it, or telling himself it was worth reading because it might be true. The distinction between those three things had blurred years ago, and he'd never been forced to examine which one was real because nobody had ever made him answer for it under these conditions. Not in a cable news interview where he controlled the conversation. Not in a friendly congressional hearing where the chairman was an ally. But in a room where a combat veteran with declassified documents and a flash drive full of his own television appearances was reading his record back to him like a court reporter reading a transcript. Boland appeared again. We need to get to the press room. The longer we wait, the worse it looks. Give me a minute, Schiff said. He sat for another 30 seconds. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward the hallway. For 6 minutes, no Democrat on the committee posted anything on any social media platform. In the Senate, where political communication is measured in seconds, 6 minutes of silence is a geological age. The clips went viral within the hour. Not the individual quotes, those had been circulated before. What went viral was the compilation. The side-by-side. Schiff's own voice making claims on the left half of the screen. His own witnesses denying those claims under oath on the right half. It was simple, it was devastating. It required no commentary. The contrast did the work. The first version to break was a 38-second cut. Schiff saying more than circumstantial evidence, followed immediately by Clapper saying no direct empirical evidence. It hit 20 million views by dinner time. By the next morning, it was at 53 million. The second clip that traveled was the Baghdad versus CNN exchange. Gabbard's voice, measured and flat. I served in Baghdad while you served on CNN, and I take the integrity of intelligence more seriously than you ever have. Someone said it to a slow-motion video of Schiff's face as she said it. The expression, or rather, the careful absence of expression. The controlled blankness of a man who has just been hit in a place he didn't know was exposed. It became a meme. The third was the parody takedown. Gabbard reading Schiff's fabricated Trump-Zelensky quotes back to him, then the single word, parody. Someone overlaid a dictionary definition of parody on screen and added a question mark. It was shared 4 million times in 24 hours. Schiff held a press conference 90 minutes after the hearing recessed. He stood in the Russell Building hallway with his communications director and 2 sympathetic senators, and he delivered the statement his team had prepared during the recess. What you saw today, he said, was the latest example of the Trump administration using the intelligence community as a weapon against its political opponents. Director Gabbard's performance was not oversight. It was political theater designed to distract from this administration's systematic dismantling of the institutions that protect our democracy. The words were right, the framing was right, the delivery was polished. But the problem was structural. Gabbard hadn't mentioned Trump once during the exchange. She hadn't mentioned the Republican Party. She hadn't mentioned any political agenda. She had read Schiff's own words back to him and compared them to the sworn testimony of his own witnesses. You can call that political theater, but you can't call it partisan when the evidence comes from the subject's own mouth. Progressive media tried the familiar pattern. Gabbard turns hearing into political spectacle, ran the MSNBC chyron. Former Democrat uses DNI position to attack Schiff was the Huffington Post headline. But the compilation video made the coverage irrelevant. 53 million people had watched Schiff say more than circumstantial evidence, and then watched Clapper say no direct empirical evidence. The spin couldn't survive the side-by-side. The most unexpected reaction came not from Republicans or Democrats, but from former Democrats. People who had left the party over the past 4 years and saw in Gabbard a reflection of their own journey. A retired Army sergeant in Ohio posted a video that got 11 million views. I left the Democratic Party in 2022 because of exactly what Gabbard described. They weaponized everything. Intelligence, the DOJ, the media, and Schiff was the face of it. I watched him say he had evidence for 3 years. He didn't, and I feel like an idiot for believing him. A veteran journalist, unnamed, writing anonymously for a media criticism newsletter, published a piece that ricocheted through newsrooms. I spent 3 years repeating Adam Schiff's claims about collusion evidence on air. He was my most frequent source. He was articulate, authoritative, absolutely certain, and he was lying. I knew the intelligence community wasn't confirming his claims. I ran them anyway because he had clearance and credibility. He used us. We let him. That's on both of us. A former Democratic state senator from Michigan who had left the party in 2023 posted a thread that was shared 250,000 times. I canvassed for Democrats using the Russia collusion story. I told voters their democracy was under attack by a foreign power. I believed Adam Schiff. Today I watched him sit in silence while his own words were played back to him. I feel betrayed, not by Republicans, by the man I trusted to tell me the truth. A Gold Star mother from Virginia called into a radio show and said something that was shorter and more devastating than anything said in the hearing room. My son died in Afghanistan. Adam Schiff voted for the war. He said he had intelligence. Then he spent 7 years saying he had intelligence about Russia. Was that a lie too? How many things did he say he had intelligence about that turned out to be nothing? The question hung in the air. Not because it had an answer, but because it revealed the nature of the wound. Schiff's credibility hadn't been damaged on a single issue. It had been damaged as a category. If a man will lie about having evidence of the most serious conspiracy in modern American history, if he will maintain that lie for 7 years on hundreds of television appearances while knowing his own witnesses contradicted him, then what can you believe him about? What can you trust? Where does the lying stop? In California, the reaction was complicated. Schiff had won his Senate seat in 2024 with a comfortable margin. His approval rating was steady, but internal polls taken in the 2 weeks after the hearing showed a 7-point drop, not because Californians suddenly supported Trump, but because the compilation video forced a simple question that no amount of spin could answer. If he lied about this, what else did he lie about? The mortgage fraud investigation continued quietly. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Maryland had not yet announced any charging decisions, but the shadow of a federal investigation hung over every public appearance Schiff made. The irony was lost on no one. The man who had spent 7 years accusing a president of financial crimes was now himself the subject of a federal financial investigation. The man who had demanded transparency was now invoking the presumption of innocence. The man who had read unverified documents into the congressional record was now asking the public to wait for all the facts before reaching conclusions. The deeper damage wasn't in any single clip or headline. It was in the pattern that Gabbard had illuminated, a pattern so consistent, so documented, so visible in his own words on his own television appearances, that once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Claim to have evidence that doesn't exist. Read fabricated documents into the congressional record. Fabricate presidential quotes and call it parody. Lie about contact with a whistleblower, then block the whistleblower's testimony when the lie is exposed. Keep witness transcripts classified when they contradict your public claims. Claim 2 primary residences simultaneously for 16 years to save money on mortgages. And through it all, maintain the posture of a man defending democracy from its enemies, while systematically deceiving the people democracy is supposed to serve. Gabbard didn't call him a traitor. She didn't call him a criminal. She didn't call him a Russian asset, which would have been the kind of irony he deserved, but she was too disciplined to deliver. She called him something more precise, something that would be harder to shake, something that would attach to his name in the way that epithets attach to political figures when the public finally sees the gap between the performance and the record. She called him an architect of lies. Gabbard returned to ODNI headquarters after the hearing. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't post on social media. She went back to work. There were intelligence assessments to review, foreign threat briefings to prepare. The kind of work that doesn't trend on Twitter because it's classified. When Webb asked her how she thought it went, she said, "I answered his questions. I showed his record. That's what oversight is supposed to look like. That's not what his hearings usually looked like," Webb said. No, Gabbard agreed. Because in his hearings, the witnesses were afraid of the camera. They were afraid of the clip. They were afraid of being called a Trump loyalist on the evening news. They forgot that a hearing room is a fact-finding venue, not a television studio. And in a fact-finding venue, the person with the better facts wins, not the person with the better camera angle. When a reporter asked her for comment the next day, she said only, "The documents speak for themselves." So do Senator Schiff's own words. An architect builds structures that are designed to look solid, to look permanent, to look real. And for 7 years, Schiff's structures had looked real. The collusion narrative, the dossier, the parody, the whistleblower coordination. Each one a carefully constructed edifice that served its purpose for a time, and then, when examined closely, turned out to be built on nothing. Gabbard didn't demolish those structures with accusations. She demolished them with the architect's own blueprints, his own words, his own TV appearances, his own classified transcripts. She held up the plans and showed the public that the foundations were empty. He walked into the hearing room as the questioner. He walked out as the subject, not because Gabbard attacked him, but because she turned on the television and he attacked himself. In the weeks that followed, Schiff did what he had always done. He gave interviews. He raised money. He posted on social media about threats to democracy and the importance of standing firm against authoritarianism. The machine still worked. The donors still donated. The base still rallied. But something had shifted. And it was the kind of shift that doesn't show up in polls or fundraising numbers, but in something harder to measure: the pause. The moment of hesitation when a reporter considers quoting Schiff as a source and remembers the compilation video. The moment when a colleague considers co-signing a letter and remembers the Clapper transcript. The moment when a voter hears him say, "I have evidence," and thinks, "You said that before." Trust, once broken by your own recorded voice, doesn't come back. Not because people are unforgiving, but because the human mind can't unwatch what it has watched. And 53 million people had watched Adam Schiff contradict himself, clip by clip, year by year, in his own words, on his own chosen stages, with his own confident delivery. The architect had built his most impressive structure. And then, in a hearing room in the Hart Building, a combat veteran from Hawaii showed the American people that the building had no foundation. She didn't demolish it, she just turned on the lights. And the building, which had looked so solid in the dark, so imposing, so permanent, so real, turned out to be hollow. A facade built from television appearances and classified access, and the particular authority that comes from saying I've seen the intelligence to a country that had no way to check. Now they could check. The transcripts were public, the compilation was everywhere, the documents were declassified. And a combat veteran who had served in Baghdad and Kuwait and the Horn of Africa, a woman who had left the party, left the comfort of the narrative, left the protection of the machine, had done the simplest and most devastating thing a person can do to an architect of lies. She showed the blueprints. And the American people, 53 million of them and counting, looked at the blueprints and looked at the building and saw that there was nothing inside. There never had been.